All right. Good morning and welcome to Science 8, Week 1, Lesson 1. I've been trying this a few times. Hopefully this works this time. All right, so this is the first time that we're doing it, and I just want to sort of let you know how I'm thinking that this week is going to go. I'm creating this YouTube video that is really the first lesson for this week. This week is taking a look at cells. And so this lesson, we're going to go through a number of, I've got the note sheet, and that's available online. Then there's some other assignments and so on to just sort of fill it out and represent it. Now, this is probably quite a bit less than what we might normally do in a regular classroom, but that's not the point. Or the points, we're getting started, we're starting slow, and we're going to see how it goes. For some of you, this might be more than you can handle for a week. And for others, you might have it done by this afternoon. We'll have to see how this goes. But you've got other classes that you've got to do, and you might have siblings at home as well that need access to the computer and things like this. And so this is what we're trying to be sensitive to. You can, this should be posted on YouTube, and so you can take a look at it anytime you want. You can watch it with your parents. It's more than welcome. And if you have questions, please feel free to get through to me or contact me through email. That's the best way. You've been receiving some, so you can reply to those. Or there is the jitsi.org site that I've set up that you've received links to as well. And that's a place where you can just pop on and we can video chat. And if you're having some questions, I can help you out potentially quite quickly. There might be other students online, so you sort of have to come in, listen, and just see if I'm available. So without further ado, let's see about getting started on this. If you printed out the notes, you can follow along, or you might want to take a look at them later. The choice is yours. So let's got to get the right settings going. There's the click, and I'm back. Excellent. So here we are. We're dealing with Science 8, Week 1, Lesson 1 on the cells. The basis for this is BC Science 8. That's your textbook, pages 22 to 39. I refer you to those pages. You have colored diagrams, and you'll have other diagrams that you can take a look at. And yeah, if you have questions, that'd be a good place to start. You can go through and read that if you want to. As I say, sometimes it will make more sense as you go through. I just want to begin talking about what we call cell theory. And the idea, I need my pen, that's what I need. It's rough and raw. There we go. So we're talking about cell theory, and this is really talking about what we understand life to be, what we understand the cell to be and its relationship to all life. And there are three statements. The cell is the basic unit of life. Now, we cannot see cells. You cannot look at your skin and see that there's skin cells there. We can't take a look at water and necessarily see cells in there. It takes having a microscope, and that's really when the idea of cells began. And it's more that the person who was using the microscope was taking a look at these things, and it looked like cells in a monastery, the rooms in a monastery, sort of like the hotel rooms, all lined up side by side. And that's where he gave the idea of the word cell. And as scientists continued and worked with this, we understood the cell to be the basic unit of life. And what that means is really stated by number 2, that all organisms, everything that is living, is made up of at least one cell. And there's lots of single-celled organisms in the world. In fact, probably lots of them on your body as well. But they can also be made up of more than one cell. So you started off life as a single cell, a zygote, and you're now trillions of cells. And cells are dying on you, and cells are being made on you, and you are made up of all of these cells. So we want to gain a better understanding of what cells are like. All cells come from other cells. So cells don't just appear. There were actually some people who thought that cells did just appear. there were like maggots that would start growing inside pieces of meat that were left out on the counter before they had refrigeration and so on. And they thought they just appeared in the meat. Well, somebody then did an experiment and put a light cloth over the meat to keep the flies away, and lo and behold, maggots no longer appeared. So when we talk about cell theory, this is pretty important. The cell is the basic unit of life. All organisms are made up of one or more cells, and cells always come from other cells. Now, within cells, there's a major division, division. We have what are called prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are bacteria. And we're going to talk a little bit about bacteria, and generally we think of bacteria as being bad. And then we talk about eukaryotic cells. Now, eukaryotic cells are the way I look at it, these are the cells that make up you and me. And that's how I remember it. You and me, eukaryotic, you and me cells. These are distinctly different than prokaryotic cells. And we're going to start off actually by taking a look at some eukaryotic cells and understanding the parts and functions and what we see when we understand what cells are. First of all, I just want to give you this idea. We're going to be talking about, we're going to end up talking a little bit about viruses, and as we talk about the immune system, we'll be discussing more about viruses. But viruses, these are these things in blue down here. And here is what we call, this is the size of a bacteria. So this is a bacteria down here. This is one called E. coli. And this would occur probably in your gut, in your stomach, or not in your stomach, in your large intestine and so on. This here is just a section, and you could draw the lines out much larger for this, for a red blood cell. Now, a red blood cell, you've got trillions, millions, and billions of them in your body. These are actually a small cell. These are not really that big in comparison with lots of other cells within your body, but you just have lots of them. And so you get an idea that if this is a red blood cell and this is a bacteria, viruses are even smaller. Like here we've got this one here, which shows up almost just as a dot within this picture. And this gives us an idea of the relative sizes that are there. All right, so eukaryotic cells, me and you, these are cells that are characterized by having membranes around organelles. Well, membranes. You can think of a membrane sort of as a balloon. You know, if you blow up a balloon, you've got the space that is in the balloon and you have the space that is out of the balloon, and it's the balloon that defines where it is. It's this membrane that defines what it is. And so when we talk about eukaryotic cells, we're going to have membranes. We're going to have membranes around the cells. We're going to have membranes around what we call the nucleus, and then around the organelles. Now, if you think of the word organelles, it's much like the word organ. And your body consists of organs. You've got a heart, and you've got a liver, and you have kidneys, and so on. These are distinct. I lost my pen. Here we go. These are distinct items within your body, within your thing. So we can do things like heart transplant, liver transplants. We can take those out. They're well defined because they have a membrane around them. And so, or a plastic bag, that's sort of the idea. So when we talk about eukaryotic cells, we're always going to be taking a look and seeing well-defined objects within those, and those, what we call it, organelles. Now, this is the first cell. When we talk about eukaryotic cells, there's two types of cells. We've got animal cells, and we will have plant cells. And so we want to take a look at some of the characteristics. Well, first of all, let's take a look. You have this diagram. This is the diagram that you're always going to have. So this is the reference diagram. When it comes to a test or anything like that, this is the diagram that you would see. Now, if you want to, you could go online, go to Google, and type type in animal cell and see the images there. And you're going to see tons and tons and tons of different diagrams that represent the cell. My promise to you is I will only use one diagram, and this is the diagram that comes from your textbook. And this is a diagram that's in black and white, so you can see how it will look. And this will, as I say, always be the diagram that we're taking a look at. So first of all, we've got the cell membrane. The cell membrane is what defines the cell. What defines you? Your skin defines you. You know, this is me. This is my skin. This is where I am. This is who I am. Over here, there's nothing over here. Or there's a book over here. Maybe you can't see it. Or you've got, you know, the calculator, a Casio FX260 Solar. This is not part of me because it's not in my cell. It's, not in my skin. And so that we can think of the cell membrane as being what defines, in essence, where the cell is and what the cell is. Now, we can then take a look at what's inside the cell. And you can see there's a lot of diagrams of different structures within here. And these are the internal parts of the cell. And so some of these you're going to have to know. These are listed in your textbook. You're going to find them in several places. I'm also giving you a vocabulary sheet, which has a lot of the organelles on there. And you're going to need to take a look at go through that vocabulary sheet and be familiar with it. So let's take a look first. Here we have the cell membrane, defines the outside of the cell. Then inside the cell, we have what's called the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is not a thing. It's just the gunk, the jelly-like substance that the organelles exist in. So it fills in the spaces between the organelles, but it's not, things can move through it, but it's not as structurous as so on. Well, so we have the cell membrane, we have the cytoplasm. The biggest organelle that you're going to find within the cell is going to be the nucleus. The nucleus is in the center of, generally can be close to the center of the cell. It is the control center of the cell. The nucleus contains the molecule called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Let's try that again. Erase that. Come back, pick up my pen. DNA. And DNA contains information. It contains all of the information needed to make a new cell, to make all the parts of the cell and have the cell function. Now, we talked about the cell membrane. And you think of it as like a balloon or something. It's really much more complicated. We're going to talk about the cell membrane really as being like the border. We have a border between Canada and the United States. You can't just willy-nilly go walking into the United States. You have to go through a border crossing. And they ask you questions about what you're bringing in and so on. And there's a possibility they might say no. And they control what comes into the United States, but the border also controls what comes into Canada. And that's the function of the membrane. It's really, really quite complex. Most things are, and they're really, really tiny, but they're very complex, and they do their jobs amazingly well. So we've got the nucleus, we have the DNA, which is the information, and that controls the rest of the processes within the cell. Some other things you're going to need to be aware of. Most of them are you see listed here, but here we have this mitochondrion. A mitochondrion is a singular name. Mitochondria is for the multiple. Cells will have multiple mitochondrions, or they will have mitochondria, and these provide energy for the cell. Think of your muscle cell. Your muscles are, for moving your arms and your bodies and so on. That energy comes through the mitochondria, where cellular respiration, we'll talk about that. Cellular respiration is how our body takes sugar and oxygen to produce energy. And it produces the waste products of carbon dioxide and water. So we've got this sort of process coming in. That's happening within a mitochondrion. Now, other things that we have within here, the endoplasmic reticulum. And sometimes I talk about the endoplasmic reticulum as just the ER. It just is easier to spell, easier to say, the endoplasmic reticulum. it has the special function of taking proteins, and proteins are what make up the body. But proteins are very complicated molecules that the cell has constructed, and the endoplasmic reticulum is responsible for moving them around the cell. Now, so you can see the nucleus. The nucleus contains the DNA, the instructions to make proteins. And then you've got the endoplasmic reticulum, which is used for moving proteins around in the cell. Where do the proteins get made? Well, they get made at ribosomes. And ribosomes are really, really tiny. In this diagram, you can see all of these dots. Those dots are what we consider to be the ribosomes. Very, very hard to see within this diagram, but that's where they're at. And it's the ribosomes that make the proteins. The endoplasmic reticulum then moves the proteins around in the cell. And how we make the proteins, well, we read the DNA. Okay? Well, then we have this Golgi body. It's located just up here. Now, when you look at the endoplasmic reticulum, it sort of looks like stacks of pancakes, the way I look at it, on the nucleus. The Golgi body looks like stacks of pancakes as well, but they are right next to this cell membrane. And the Golgi body, well, the endoplasmic reticulum was responsible for taking proteins and moving them inside the cell. The Golgi body is responsible for taking proteins, packaging them up in small packages called vesicles, and sending them out of the cell. Now, our cells produce different proteins that are needed elsewhere in our body. And so they have to be able to package them up and send them out. And that's the role of the Golgi body. So endoplasmic reticulum, moving proteins within the cell. Golgi body, exporting, you can think of it. Exporting, sending the proteins out of the cell. All right, so what else? So there's ribosomes. Ribosomes occurs on this diagram twice. We have this thing called a vacuole. Now, the vacuole is basically for storage. Generally like storage of water, maybe food particles, maybe even waste in some cases. Now, within an animal cell, the vacuole is pretty small. You wouldn't necessarily even see it. But within a plant cell, we'll see it's much larger. But that's the vacuole. It's a storage tank for things that the cell might need. And up here, we have this lysosome. This is the lysosome. This is our recycler. If I can spell it out, there we go. Our recycler. When organelles get old, they need to be broken down and broken up. Well, the lysosome will do that, and will recycle chemicals and so on that are in the cell and recycle them for more newer organelles. So when we take a look at an animal cell, this is what the animal cell looks like. These are some of the structures you see within the animal cell. Now, this is, to the right here, this is a microscopic, so electron microscope. And electron microscopes can see things, there we go. I'm going to have to get better. So electron microscopes can see things much smaller. And so when we take a look at the cell, here would be the cell membrane around the cell. This here is the nucleus. So if we were going to point this over here. Now, over here you saw this dark spot, and that's this dark spot in here. This is called the nucleolus. And the nucleolus is part of the control structure that's there for the cell as it goes about its life. Anyway, so that's the nucleolus, and so this is what an animal cell is like. These are eukaryotic cells. These are you and me cells. Let's go on. Oh yeah, so here are some other pictures from microscopes. And I really want to point these out because we talk about the diagrams of these cells, and we can see, oh, there's the endoplasmic reticulum, and there's the Golgi bodies and the ribosomes. Everything is so clear. It's so wonderful. This is what reality is like. So what we have here, we can see the cell membrane. Cell membrane's going around. It defines where the cell is. We can see the nucleus. You might say, well, why is the nucleus pink? Well, that's because this has been stained. So they've taken certain chemicals, and the chemicals have been sucked up inside the nucleus and turning it into a bright pink, got a little sort of hazy pink around the outside. And inside here, this is the cytoplasm, and these are all the organelles, and I can't really tell. So researchers, so this is what it would look like, and I think this is a light microscope. What an animal cell would look like under a light microscope, not much to see. This is another one. Now, this is under like a standard microscope that we would have in our school, and if we had been there, we would have been perhaps taking a look at these. These, I believe, are cheek cells. You can take like a popsicle stick and just scrape the inside of your mouth, and you put this onto a slide for a microscope, and then so this has been stained, but this is what they would look like. And so this would be about the size. That'd be the cell membrane, and this is the nucleus. And so then you can see all of these dots and different lightness and darkness things within there. Those are the different organelles. And again, not much to see under a light microscope, but those are what we understand. So researchers have been looking at these, and that's where we get our understanding with. So now let's take a look at a plant cell. Ooh, shiny. The plant cell, again, is going to have membranes. So we have a defined nucleus, and we have all these different structures. So here's a mitochondrion, cytoplasm is still there. We have our endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, a Golgi body, again, towards the outside, the endoplasmic reticulum towards the nucleus. There's our nucleus. There are some things over here. Here's a cell membrane. Some things you need to be aware of. Number one is the cell wall. This is the cell wall. And the cell wall is a very hard structure. Think of like a tall tree. There's no skeleton in a tall tree. How does a tall tree stand up? Well, it's because of all the cell walls that are in the cells of the tree. Those cell walls all act together to allow the tree to be so tall. This is where our cellulose, that's the sugar in essence that the cell wall is made out of, and that's what keeps the structure of the cell and what keeps the structure of the plant. So we have a cell wall, that's the outermost feature for this, and just inside we have a cell membrane. We have to have a border. We have to have something controlling what moves in and what moves out. So the cell wall is definitely something that this is the defining characteristic for plant cells. If there's a cell wall, we're going to call it a plant cell. If there's no cell wall, we're going to call it an animal cell. Some other characteristics that we're going to tend to see. Here's a vacuole. Now here you can see this vacuole is pretty large in terms of the cell cutout. Well, this vacuole is probably pretty small in comparison to what it would look like in a regular plant cell. We'll take a look at some other diagrams, and the vacuole makes up almost like 95% of what's in the cell. There's not much room for other stuff that's left there. Here we have the nucleus, the nucleolus. We have all of the organelles that we were talked about, but we also have a new organelle, and that's a chloroplast. And the chloroplast, well, first of all, it's green. We'll see a picture of that. And it's where photosynthesis takes place. Just realize that I have to talk about these two reactions, cellular respiration and photosynthesis. I don't think I have a page for that tool. I'll just throw that in there. Photosynthesis is where sunlight, let's make a sun, there's my sun. Sunlight comes down and gets changed into chemical energy that is stored. If we didn't have plants, there would be no other life because everything else is based upon the photosynthesis that happens within our green plants. Really, really important. Chloroplasts are not, however, a defining feature for plant cells. There are some microorganisms that also contain chloroplasts that are animal cells and not plant cells. The cell wall is the defining feature. Okay? So there we have our cell wall. And again, this is the diagram that on a test that you're always going to see. There's lots of diagrams out there. This is in the textbook. This is the one we're going to use. This over here is supposed to be a plant cell. And here you have the nucleus. And again, here, the nucleus is pretty large, the nucleolus within here. And I'm really thinking, is this really a plant cell? It doesn't look like a plant cell I've seen. But you can see some different structures in here for the different organelles. And you'd have your cell wall and your cell membrane. Those are defining, in essence, the cell. But let's take a look at some micrographs of that. So these would be onion roots or onion cells. I know that because this is one of the lab activities that we normally would be doing. We take a look at onion cells because we can peel off a thin layer, and so we can see basically 1 or 2 cells thick, and we can take a look and see the cells. So these dark lines, that's going to be the cell wall. And so you can see that cell wall defines nicely the cell. These almost look like bricks that are stacked together or stones that are stacked together, and that's really what they're like. This here would be the nucleus, really small. They don't take them all up. And then what we see else in here, this would be our vacuole. The cell is mainly a vacuole. It's not made up of the other things. It's just one big storage container. And if you think about, well, I was going to say if you think about root cells, but this isn't a root cell. This is like an onion cell. And so the onion has, you know, they're crisp, they're tight, they've got a lot of flavor, and that's where, you know, the energy and so on is stored within the cell, so within the vacuoles that we've got here. So this is what an animal, or sorry, a plant cell would look like. Here's another plant cell, or a series of plant cells. This would probably be from a root tip. This is so we have some prepared slides that we take a look at, sometimes in Science 8, but more in later grades when we're taking a look at how cells reproduce, how cells divide and make new cells. And so here you see, so first of all, you can see that these dark lines, those are the cell walls, and then we've got the nucleus that is within the cell walls, and you've got some vacuoles that are here, and they'd be organelles. Now, here's one that's different. And these dark lines in here, these are chromosomes. And what's happening is that the cell is going through a cell division. Half the chromosomes are going to one end of the cell, the other half are going to the other end of the cell, and then this is going to form a division between there. It's going to build a cell wall in between. We're going to end up with 2 cells. We would call them 2 daughter cells. Now, you can see some other ones. So this is the anaphase. Here we have the chromosomes. Again, they're lined up along the equator. So this is happening. This is later. This is younger. And over here, you can see them sort of, they're forming up along the, towards the center. So this happens, then this happens, and then this happens is really one way of looking at it. I'm just trying to see some other examples of cells where you might be able to see it. Not really. So anyways, but you can definitely see the idea of the cells, the cell walls within this root tip. And here you can see chromosomes starting to form, and the cell nucleus is going to disappear. So this one's getting close to doing cellular division. You can see it's quite big. When the cells get too big, then they divide. So here, oh, this is a good example. Here we can see these 2 cells, these are 2 daughter cells. The chromosomes is separated like this, and we've got a nucleus here and a nucleus here, and we can see the thin plate in between. So these cells are going to now independent of each other, and they're going to continue growing. Really, really interesting picture. You don't need to know about these different phases and so on. It's just, to me, fascinating to see. Here again is, so if we go back, this would be a stained prepared slide showing us the different parts of the, so we can see the different cells and so on. And so we can see the chromosomes. This would be a live cell. And so first of all, you can see here's the cell, I'm trying to trace this. Here's the cell wall, as it were. Here is basically the vacuole in the main part here, but you can see these green things. And these green things, those are the chloroplasts that are in the cell. Why do plants look green? It's because these chloroplasts contain a green chemical called chlorophyll. And so these are within the cell. And these actually be moving around in the cell, and they are doing the photosynthesis within here. And yeah, so that's what it looks like. And so within here would be the nucleus. Can't really see where it would be. Oh, this looks like it might be the nucleus right here. A little bit larger than what a chloroplast would look like. Fairly see-through though, because this isn't stained, and so there's nothing to make it stand out. Mostly a vacuole, and there'd be some other organelles that we cannot see as such within this diagram. Okay, so before we do this, I'm just going to go back. Let's talk about cellular respiration. RES. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's try this again. Cellular respiration. So this is taking place in the mitochondrion. And basically it goes food to energy. If we were to take a look at what we would call the chemical equation for this, food is going to be there as sugar. And we're in essence going to, you can think of burning the sugar with oxygen. And that produces energy. So you can think of it, if you're out there playing basketball, playing volleyball, or running or something like that, you could, if you play basketball hard, you might go out and play a hard game or have a hard practice. What do you want to do when you come home? You want to eat. You need to get some sugars and so on in with you. When you're out running and running hard, what do? Well, you breathe hard because your body needs more oxygen. So your sugars plus your oxygen are giving your body the energy that it needs. Now we have carbon dioxide, CO2, that's a waste product. And we also have water, H2O, that in essence is a waste product as well. And so this is what happens within the mitochondria, within the cells, providing energy for that. So the energy source was sugar. If you take something that has sugar, you could light it on fire potentially and have it burn. This is in a controlled reaction. We're not producing flame, but we are producing energy that is used by your bodies. The other side of this, not an R, the other side of this is photosynthesis. Go away, go away, go away. I touch a button and things happen. Anyways, photosynthesis. This takes place in chloroplasts. Some of you, I think, might have already heard about this before, like grade 6, grade 7, in my understanding, so this is a bit of review. But in a photosynthesis, which takes place in green plants, we take CO2 from the air, and in fact, places like greenhouses down in the Lower Mainland, where they're growing tomatoes and different fruits and vegetables under controlled conditions, what they will sometimes do is they will increase the amount of CO2 in the greenhouse, because that helps make the plants grow bigger and faster and stronger. So we have CO2, and we need water. Well, what do you do with your plants? You water your plants. You water your yard. That water is necessary for photosynthesis to take place. So your plant is going to take in water. It's going to take it up through the roots into the leaves and so on. It's going to bring CO2 in from the air. In fact, it's really fascinating. When you take a look at plant cells, there are these cells, specialized cells, that are called, if I remember, stomata, I believe. And they look like lips. And so if we were, we'd see all these other plant cells around them, and you've got these stomata, and these stomata, they can open up and close. and they're on the bottom side of the leaf. And this is where the CO2 gets taken into the cells or into the leaves. So that these open up, allow the CO2 to come into the leaves. The CO2 is then used by the chloroplasts in the cells and takes sunlight, and it produces sugars, and it produces oxygen. So plants are producing oxygen. They're taking CO2 and they're making oxygen. They're making sugars. They're storing this sun's energy into the sugars. This is why when we need food, when we're working hard and so on, we need to go eat because we need to get those sugars into our body. And we produce oxygen. So cellular respiration in mitochondria, photosynthesis in chloroplasts. Sugar plus oxygen produces energy, CO2 and H2O. The reverse of this, CO2 plus H2O plus energy produces sugars and oxygen. These are just the reverse chemical reactions of each other. This one we take energy out, this one we store energy. Very, very important processes for our cells. All right, let's go on. Prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are bacteria characterized by the lack of membranes. So when we take a look inside a prokaryotic cell, inside a bacteria, one of the things we're going to see is that there is no nucleus. We don't see that defined nucleus. For a lot of cells that we saw that nucleus is really the only thing that we could actually see. Within a bacteria, we're not going to see that. We're not spending a lot of time on this, but let's just talk about, are bacteria good or bad? Well, it depends. If you've ever had strep throat, or I had a scratch on the side of my leg and it began festering and becoming all pussy and so on, that was a bacterial infection. You can have strep throat, or you can have a staph infection in your skin and so on. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection. These are bacteria that get into your body and they can make you sick. So we tend to think of bacteria as being bad. We feel sick. These types of infections can be very serious unless they get taken care of. So we want to be able to get rid of those. On the other hand, you can't live without bacteria. In fact, you've got bacteria all over your body, not only all over your body, but inside your body as well, because they are used in your digestive system, in your large intestine, for your body to work properly, for your digestive system to work properly. It's really kind of weird. So, yogurt in some cheeses use bacteria. That's how you make yogurt. You infect it with bacteria and it changes the milk and produces yogurt. So how is it yogurt goes bad? It's already bad milk. Here's Activia. Now, this is called probiotic yogurt. Probiotic. You hear that sometimes on commercials, and you can go out and buy probiotic concentrations, 10 billion things. Basically, they're just feeding you bacteria. Here it says, whether you can see this or not, it says billions of live and active probiotics, billions of live and active bacteria. That's what they're saying. So yogurt is made naturally by using bacteria. They've perhaps added some more that you're going to ingest into your body because your body needs them. Now, the interesting thing is with some of modern developments is that they make factories out of bacteria, or cause bacteria to become factories. And one of the first ones was to make the chemical insulin. If you diabetes, you may have heard of diabetes. Diabetes is your body's inability to break down sugars. It needs a chemical called insulin for that to happen. You might know someone who has diabetes, and sometimes if it's bad, they actually have to poke themselves and give themselves insulin. Actually, I forget his name now, but he's in grade 8 and he has diabetes, and he has to check his insulin levels, and he has to adjust his insulin that he takes so that he can, live properly. So here are some examples of bacteria being good. But Oh, there we go. So let's just take a look here. Because we have classifications of bacteria. We can have bacteria that look like rods. We can have bacteria that look more like spirals, curls of things. And we have bacteria that are as spheres. Now, sometimes these spheres stack themselves up into like chains like this, and sometimes into 4s and 8s and pairs, and here's a whole bunch of them. So it's really kind of funny how they do this, and they will exist like that and live like that. Here we can see some pictures. So these are really, really small. 1 micrometer, very small. 2 micrometers, a bit larger. So these are the rods. And then here are the spirals. And that's, in essence, what these different bacteria and so on look like. They're different from each other, but they're all, in essence, bacteria. And we don't see any nucleus or anything like that in them. So, how do you treat bacterial infections? If you've had a bacterial infection, you went and saw a doctor, and most likely the doctor said, oh, we're going to have to prescribe you an antibiotic, an anti-life thing. So antibiotics kill bacteria. Now, it's really neat because they selectively kill bacteria and they don't harm your other cells. Like, it would be no good to kill bacteria if we killed you off as well. So antibiotics kill just the bacteria in your body. And if you have a bacterial infection, this will kill the bacteria. But it kills both the good and the bad. So sometimes if you've had to take a lot of antibiotics, they might even say you best eat some more yogurt and so on to build the bacteria back up in your body. Now, there's a problem with bacteria as well. Over the years, this is becoming more and more prevalent. We have what are called drug-resistant bacteria. We have bacteria that are now resistant to the antibiotics that we've got. And so that, it's sort of like shooting at a bacteria and ping, the antibiotic bounces off of them. It doesn't kill them any longer when it used to. And this has happened because of how people have taken antibiotics. Well, there's two ways. Doctors overprescribe antibiotics. I feel sick. Here, take an antibiotic. It's not going to do you any harm, but, people, oh, I feel better. It's because they've taken the pill. It's not because that the antibiotic's necessarily done anything with them. So they've been overprescribed. Then, if you ever take antibiotics, they always have warnings on them. Make sure that you finish the antibiotic. If you have 7 days and you feel of antibiotic and you feel better after 3 days, keep taking them for the full 7 days. Kill off all the bacteria. When you only take part of your prescription, that's how you end up making drug-resistant bacteria. And those are terrible, terrible things. We make it really, really difficult to try and get rid of. All right, enough of bacteria. So let's come back to this diagram here. So we want to talk about viruses. And so here we've got our viruses. Here we have our red blood cell, our animal cell, and here we have our bacteria. Large, medium, and then tiny. And this is really just keep those ideas in mind. Now, technically, viruses are non-living. Technically, they don't fit the characteristics of living things. They don't reproduce on their own. They don't feed. They don't poop. All of these different things. So we think of them as being non-living. Yet, they're part of our everyday living. And so it sort of becomes difficult in terms of knowing living, non-living, where does the line come in? Viruses really push that question. But we're just going to say for now, they're really non-living as such. So examples, COVID-19, that is a virus. Colds, when you get a cold, this is a rhinovirus that you get. It affects your nasal passages and your upper throat and so on. Makes stuff, and then you have flus. A flu is different than a cold. It's a different type of virus, but we get flus going around the world every year. Back in 1918, there was a pandemic of what was called the Spanish flu, and it killed over 1 million people around the world. In fact, my great-grandfather, he worked as a pharmacist in a small town in Saskatchewan during this time. And as a result, he was often would be treating people, interacting with people who had the flu, and he ended up dying in that flu epidemic, that pandemic back in 1918. Chickenpox. Some of you may have had chickenpox. Some of you may have had a vaccination for chickenpox. Measles. You often get a vaccination for measles. These are all viruses, viral infections. Now, the interesting thing, viruses require another cell to reproduce. And that's what viruses do. It's not like they do much. All they do is really reproduce. And when they reproduce, that's how they make you sick. So here we've got two parts. We have the host cell, you can see here, and here we have a virus. And the virus comes in contact with a host cell. Now, when it comes in contact with the host cell, it attaches to the cell, it injects some DNA or RNA into the cell, and what that does is that it takes over what the cell normally does. It switches off, in essence, the nucleus from doing cell stuff and changes it into a virus factory. Let's go virus factory. And you can see that, first of all, it's reproducing the DNA or the RNA inside the cell. It's taken over from the cell. And as we progress, it produces the covering over top of the material there. And here, this is showing the cell erupting. And this cell is dying. That's terrible. Let me try that again. It's exploding. It's just going to die. So sometimes for viral infections, the cells explode and the cells die. And what they're doing is they're producing new cells. Here's new viruses. And those new viruses, they go out and infect the other cells around them. And so the virus spreads from one cell to the next, to the next, to the next, as more and more viruses are being produced and so on. With COVID-19, we talk about social distancing. And the idea of social distancing is that if you sneeze or if you cough, there's little bits of saliva and so on that are coming out. And you can see that these things are being released from the cell. And they're being made in the cells, in your nose and in your throat. And so when you sneeze and so on, those droplets of water that come out of your nose, out of your mouth, they will sometimes contain virus cells. And this is where social distancing comes in. So if you are here and another person is here and they chew. The whole point is that the droplets come out and they land before they get to you. That's the reason why we do social distancing, so that we're staying away from the virus particulates that are being sprayed out by somebody else. That's why the social distance, because these are being produced by the cell. And so this is how a virus produces. Takes over a cell, causes the cell to make more viruses, and the viruses get exploded out into the environment, as it were. And then somebody sneezes, and so they make somebody else sick. So, I'm sick. Oh, yeah, I don't want to get sick. But this is the social distancing. I don't know where the voices come from. So this is how a virus reproduces. This is what viruses do. And it's when they do this that they make you sick and so on. And your body tries, well, we'll talk about that. Because, these are really cool. These are called bacteriophages. Bacteriophages, I might have this wrong. These things are like spaceships. This is an artist's diagram of what it looks like. But you can see it's got a capsule, it's got a tube, and then it has these legs. And these things come along. And this is an actual electron microscope of these. And you can see the bacteriophages, and they are attached to the side of the virus. So this is, attached to the side of the bacteria. They only attack bacteria. So here's the bacteria, and here are these things. They're so small, you can see there's a whole bunch of them being attached to here. And what they're doing is just doing what we talked about. They have DNA inside here that gets shipped into the bacteria. The bacteria then starts making more bacteriophages, which then kills the bacteria. It is the coolest thing. When we were just talking about bacteria, we said that if we wanted to kill a bacteria, we take antibiotics. Well, it's kind of neat that if you lived in Russia, then you would take bacteriophages. Yes. So in bacteria, what they've done is they've collected lots and lots of these different bacterial phages that attack different bacteria. And so if you have a bacterial infection, they can give you one of these bacterial phages for it, and it kills off the bacteria. No antibiotics. You're not getting immune to any, or you're not creating, stronger and stronger bacteria. You're killing the bacteria. This is really a fascinating thing. It goes beyond anything that we're talking about within Science 8. But this is really what we call Western medicine. Britain, United States, Canada, and so on developed the idea of antibiotics. I forget exactly who developed it, but it was actually a fluke that antibiotics were formed. And it's a strange story. I might have to tell you sometime. But anyways, antibiotics were developed and used in Western countries. They worked really well to kill off bacteria. It used to be that before we had antibiotics, the worst place you could go would be to the hospital, because they might do some sort of if they were going to do some surgery or something like that on you, then you would come down with an infection afterwards, and they didn't understand why. But they weren't cleaning their instruments, they weren't sterilizing their instruments. It was bad. You would get these bacteria, and so dying because of bacteria was more of a thing than dying because something that happened more because of something that you took. So anyways, bacteria really, really bad. Antibiotics worked really, really well and cured a lot of people, but now we're having problems with drug-resistant bacteria, and it's because of antibiotics. Bacteriophages, these little spaceships that go in and kill just the bacteria. An interesting and different approach. Might say one might be better than the other. They're different from each other. Both end up doing the same thing, but a different approach to them. These are using viruses to kill bacteria. This is using chemicals to kill bacteria. Anyways, so how do you get rid of a viral infection? Because viruses are bad. COVID-19 is bad. Chickenpox is bad. These are not good viruses for you to get. Antibiotics aren't going to do anything. So if you have a cold, going to the doctor, he's not going to give you a little pill that says antibiotic. If he does, he's not treating the cold. He's just giving you an antibiotic. Well, our immune system is amazing. It's amazing in terms of how it can prevent us from help us to get away from being sick and give us immunity to getting sick again. And so that's what we're going to be talking about more next week. We're going to be getting into and talking about our immune system and how our body is able to protect us from the terrible, terrible, scary world that's around us. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope next Tim, it says, not next time. Exclamation A. Anyways, so you go online, you're going to, under Teams, you'll find the assignments and so on that you need to be doing and working on this weekend. Watch out for an email that will have a link to the quiz that I want you to do, and have a great week. Again, feel free to stop in and chat with me and just to check in and let me know how things are going. All right? So anyways, until next time, I feel like I need to sign off. I need to have an intro music or something. This is Mr. Johnson from room 15. Take care.